Everybody good? It's Tuesday, right? Tuesday? Tuesday? Okay. All right, let's see if I can get the thing to work this time. Yep, there it goes. All right. So what we want to do today is give you guys a bit of an organizational overview on our company, Blue Cross. I want to talk to you a little bit about our roadmap, tell you where we're at from a governance, risk, and compliance perspective, the applications, the modules, let you in on some of the secret sauce that we've been talking about a little bit on how we've been able to expand across the enterprise, what works for us, what hasn't worked for us, things to do, things not to do, and things to be mindful of as you continue to grow your GRC program. So, show of hands, because I always like to put people on the spot, who has already implemented MEtricStream or another GRC solution in the room? Okay. Who is in process of going through that journey? All right, fantastic. So we got a decent mix, which is always a good thing. So as we're kind of going through here, let me tell you a little bit about our company itself. There we go. All right. We were founded in 1939. We're responsible for about 6.1 million lives. As an organization, we are the largest payer in the state of Michigan and one of the largest in the country. We have roughly 8,100 employees. When you add contractors into that mix, the number's around 10,000 as well. We manage PPOs, HMO plans, wellness plans, Medicare, Medicaid, you name it, we're involved in it from a healthcare perspective. In terms of our story at Blue Cross, as Peter kind of mentioned in the forefront, we started out in 2010, 2011 in some of our processes. We slowed things down and we ramped things back up again. Today we have 8 modules across the enterprise. We've been able to retire about 12 disparate applications across the company, ranging from full-blown systems to homegrown things, SharePoint sites, Excel files, reports, all that detail across the company. We've been able to streamline those users in those areas as well as executive reporting. There are still some things that we're trying to do, and we'll talk about that, and things that we are looking to expand upon. But at the end of the day, we've built a value structure through our GRC program, our GRC application, our processes, where we've been able to streamline things across the company for things like compliance management, so business metrics, attestation, issues, policies, procedures, development, rollout, risk. These are all things that we've started to expand across the enterprise and be able to drive that consistent approach to how we do things. So you're going to hear me talk a lot about how I talk about risk and how my team talks about risk is exactly the same as how the rest of the enterprise talks about risk, talks about issues. Our definitions are the same. So it doesn't matter what part of the organization you sit in. When we talk about issues, when we talk about controls, when we talk about risks, we're all talking the same language. A critical issue to me is a critical issue to you. High is a high, right? Insignificant is insignificant. We put those guardrails around from a program perspective to drive that consistency. So when we actually talk about our roadmap, one of the things that we really like to focus on is a phased rollout. Who here thinks a Big Bang approach works? Trick question, right? And everybody kept their hands down, so that's good. That's good. We're off to a good start. And I'm not funny. I'll try to be at times, but it's not going to work. So we focused on a phased rollout approach. When I joined Blue Cross in 2013, I said, look, let's look at the modules that we purchased. Let's look at the value that can be driven across the organization, across the company from those applications. And let's focus on quick wins. And not just quick wins within the company, but also for the executives. We want to drive that transparency and that accountability across the entire company. So when we're saying things about our program and when we started, we all started off and kicked off in 2010 when my leader, Michelle Samuels, said, our corporate compliance officer and general auditor, that there's got to be a better way. There's got to be an application to how we do this. We had SharePoint sites popping up all over the place, very decentralized applications and solutions across the entire enterprise for oversight and compliance functions because you have pockets of compliance throughout the entire company, both at that first line of defense, everywhere. And so we got a whole bunch of business areas together and said, Let's do an RFI. Let's do an RFP. There's got to be a better way. And through that process, we did a whole vendor analysis, and we did select the MEtricStream solution. That wound up being the solution that we selected. But there's a huge gap here. We had a big gap between when we selected our vendor and when we actually did our implementation. Why was that? Patient Protection Affordable Care Act, PPACA, Obamacare happened, right? It basically derailed and put a whole new framework into the healthcare industry. So we had to focus on that. So in 2013, we started ramping back up again, and we looked at the modules that we had, and we looked at the value add, and we said, look, ACA, PPACA, Obamacare, Patient Protection Affordable Care Act was our huge risk for us, right? It was new. It was a new process, it was a new product, it was a new regulation, and how we were going to manage that. So we said, of the modules that we had, let's focus on compliance and issue management, because that allowed us to, through our compliance liaisons in our first line of defense, that allowed us to expand into roughly 32 business areas of the company. So that said to us, we have a wide-ranging review right there through compliance metrics coming in and issues, but it was only about 64 users. And when we launched in 2014, we then were able to build up some word of mouth. Now, what I'll tell you is when you look at this and you look at that gap, just because we weren't implementing doesn't mean the program wasn't doing anything. We were focused on process, procedure, aligning across the company. I'll tell you that we talked about, an issue is an issue is an issue, a risk is a risk is a risk, a control is a control is a control. One of the biggest issues that we ran into was color. It took us 13 months across all those oversight areas, compliance areas, risk areas, to align not only on definition, but color. What's critical? To some people it's purple, to some people it's red, to others it's orange. Getting executives, leaders, and everybody to align on color was a huge undertaking for us. And I know it sounds ridiculous, but it had to happen. We found the definition process a lot easier than color. And that's important because if you know the applications, you know the systems, when you run the report, you have colors that are assigned on dashboards and reports to the various levels, right? So what we didn't want to have was I had a dashboard, and then this leader had a dashboard, and then this leader had a dashboard, and mine's orange, yours is purple, pink, whatever it is. We didn't want that to occur, so we had a real focus on those items. So although there's that gap, we really were still moving our program forward, aligning on our objectives in detail. 2015 for us was, now I've got a couple modules in, I've got about 64 business area users on the tool and on the solution. Who's next? And for us, it was model audit rule, or Sarbanes-Oxley. That allowed us to expand to additional about 300 control metrics in the system and about 250 more end users. By the end of 2015, we were around 1,000 end users, bring that number. We still had our 2 modules, but we had more people using the tool and the solution. And we were really starting to drive a ton of value from that initial implementation of compliance and issue. And then it became, we want more, gotta have it, let's go. So for 2016, we really focused on more modules and additional configuration. We implemented the audit management module for compliance-based projects, monitoring reviews, advisory reviews, things of that nature. We implemented the policy and document management solution. Policies, procedures, key documents. We implemented risk management, and we implemented regulatory alerts. A lot of module implementations, but for very focused items. Where companies fail and programs fail and processes fail in this space, they do a lot of modules for a lot of business areas. We did 4 modules essentially to start with compliance. When I'm talking risk and I'm implementing risk management, although my initial piece is for compliance risk assessments, compliance risk monitoring, compliance risk tracking, I had ERM at the table during requirements. But they knew the end game was they were going to be on the tool and on the solution for their reporting and their detail across the enterprise for all the things that we managed at the enterprise level for risk management. We call them our priority enterprise risks, right? So we had ERM aligned to that process, but they weren't our first use case. We started in compliance. Why did we start in compliance? Because that's already where we had a huge level set of end users, process, executives bought on, everybody was driving towards the same thing, and we had our edict and our mantra from my boss, Michelle Samuels, and Kelly Lang, who's the privacy official at Blue Cross. So we knew what we needed to do and how to get there, but we had to build out that. You don't want to just throw all the modules in and then say everybody use them, because that's never going to work. You put the modules in and you align on the process and you align on the use case and you roll one out at a time, and you have to constantly be updating your roadmap. 2017 for us was a huge undertaking. What I mean by that was we changed the way that we track incidents, privacy incidents, legal incidents, matters, management, fraud investigations. We streamlined applications across the entire enterprise. We retired 4 tools and implemented the MEtricStream case management solution. This has been a huge win for us, because what we did was I gave everybody in the company, all 10,000 employees and contractors at both our parent and our subsidiaries, access to that solution. They didn't realize they had access to the solution. They have access to the solution. We have a web form on the front end of our case management. So they start using the tool, and then you're meeting with areas as part of your rollout and as part of your roadmap and process of, hey, I heard you have, or you're having problems with policy management, the life cycles, the approvals, the workflow, or metrics or issues or risks or whatever it could be. And they say, well, I've never heard of the tool. I've never heard of the solution. I haven't heard of the program, so you need to spend a lot of time with me to get there. And then we just say, you've reported an incident of some kind, right? You've seen the web form? And then their eyes light up and they say, that's you guys? I'm like, yeah, that's us. So now there's a comfort level built in. And it's easier for us to roll out into these areas because they know, they've at least seen the tool, they know what it can do, they've heard a lot about it across the company, and they know that it's a strategic initiative and strategic application for us. 2018, and everything that we're doing now, continues to not only expand, we're adding third-party risk managements and UAT right now. So far, so good. And we're doing high trust. Everybody knows what high trust is? Head shakes, yeah? We're implementing high trust through our compliance management solution and issue management solution. Not only for us as Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan, but all our subsidiaries as well. We're driving high trust through here. Why? When we started with compliance metrics and we started with compliance issues and detail and controls coming in, we then expanded to model audit rule. We're expanding into larger control areas, having conversations about like our SOC controls and things of that nature. When you start to meet with the executives and they say, hey, we're going to do high trust. Where do you report your controls now? And they say it's already here. They don't want to go to 2 separate locations, 2 separate systems to report the same thing, because your model audit rule control for financial controls is also a high trust control. It's also a SOC control. It's also one of your frameworks and your ITGCs, right? So these people don't want to go to separate places. We hit a tipping point with our program. We've got over 2,000 users on the solution right now in the tool, with about 45% of our user base accessing the tool at least monthly. 85% of our user base accessing the tool at least quarterly. And about 93% at least annually for something. So when we talk about how we were able to do that, now I can't go back because that's going to do that. Technology is fun. Okay, so let's talk about the roadmap. We're going to talk about it. This is my current roadmap. When we go from module to functionality at a very, very, very high level, this is the roadmap, and this is what we're able to do. We have about 27 departments in the company using the solution for their major functions. This includes things, policies, metrics, controls, issues, things we were talking about, risk, but also attestation. Business areas come to us with a problem. I'm trying to track X. I'm trying to do Y. Can you do it? And in terms of how we've set up our program, we tend to not say no. And I know it drives my boss nuts. And I know it drives Marlene nuts. She asked me not to do that, and I told her I was going to do it. So the reality of it is that we've got a roadmap that's constantly changing and evolving. And the full version of this just keeps going and going. There's no way you're ever going to fit it on a slide. But then when we talk about how we're able to do this and how we're able to continuously drive, one thing you need to do as you're developing your program is put up your objectives to set your guardrails within your system and your application. And how do you do that? Here's the secret sauce. I saw people taking pictures of the roadmap before. We're about to get into the secret sauce. Okay? All right. So, define your program objectives. Build out your governance structures. Build out your integrated pieces for things like risk management, control management, your libraries, all that fun stuff. Identify those coordinated functions and start there. Those coordinated functions should be your first use cases. It shouldn't be this one-off piece that you think is going to drive value or you think is going to have the ROI, because newsflash, it won't. The reality is focus on those coordinated functions, because when you're implementing, that's going to allow you to take over your user base and expand it across multiple areas. And if they're talking to one another and you're able to drive your reports and your consistency, your list reports, your dashboards, everything from the system and the tool, that's where you drive your value. The whole thing is strategic, and you need to understand that. Very rarely are you going to run into, I'm now retiring a whole bunch of applications. We got lucky with case management. But very rarely are you going to run into that scenario where you're like, ooh, I've got hard cost saving, soft cost saving, right? Once you go from there, focus on your business level performance. That's critical. If you run your program, if you're the person that's responsible for administrating the tool, both at the database level or even just from a modular piece of it, know your business partners, know their functions, know their goals, and if the tool isn't meeting from a performance standpoint at the application level or isn't driving that coordinated function, get the vendor in quickly. Start to enhance the application. Don't let them leave. We don't let ours leave. They're here constantly. They have a cube space, an office space, Blue Cross, and they're not allowed to leave. I'm going to say it again, they're not allowed to leave, and you got to keep them there. Lock them in a room, do whatever it is that you need to do, but don't let them leave until you're satisfied. There's a huge piece of this. Here's your secret sauce on this front. Senior executive alignment. Understand and know that not only your leader, but your boss's boss, your senior executive, your senior most executive in your chain needs to understand the value that you're driving and needs to be supported. Added to that you need to be going in front of their peer group as much as you can. Scream from the hilltops the things that are working, but don't be afraid to scream from the hilltops on the things that don't. If something is working really well and you're aligning in those areas, that's fantastic. But if something's not working, you need to be the first person to come out and say to those senior executives and be willing to say to those senior executives, you know what? We got to slow down for this reason. This isn't working the way we need it to. Maybe it's one of those items, right? Maybe we misaligned on the measures from a performance standpoint that we wanted to track on, and I'm not getting out of these reports exactly what I wanted. Maybe I didn't have the right people sitting in the requirement sessions. Maybe I let that individual contributor define too much of what the form looks like, and I didn't circle with the appropriate leaders to figure out what exactly that executive needs. One of our huge pieces, anytime we implement, it's not only working with those people in that area to say, what do you need, what's your problem, how do I help you? But it's working with that executive to be able to say, what reports do you need, what do you care about? You have to know the button to push for that executive. What does that executive care about? Some people, it's reporting, it's dashboards, it's fanciness. I want to know what's going on in my area. Other people, it's time. You need to be able to save me time. How do I measure time? Other people, it's money. Are you going to charge me to use this, or can I just use it? Just use it, right? If you're going into business areas and you're talking to senior executives, you better know what that button that is, that executive that you need to push on. What do they care about? And if you don't know it, find your peer in that area and talk to them and figure it out. And then tell your team what those buttons are so when they have the conversations and they're in there, they know what to focus on. This particular executive really cares about the time savings, not hard cost savings, but the time savings of automated reports. So no matter what you're doing, focus on that. This executive cares about number of clicks. This executive wants a web-based front end. You got to dummy-proof some things as much as you can. Focus on that and know that button to push. And then it all leads to our guiding principles. Set them up, understand them, live your program. Live them. Focus on these items. And let's just go through them one by one. Challenge the status quo. Just because you've been doing things a certain way for however long it is doesn't mean that it's the right way. You want to become more efficient? Sometimes this is the answer. Sometimes it's not. When we're working with business areas and we're going through JAD sessions in detail, going through the process and trying to map it to the application, sometimes the answer isn't the application. And that's okay. But you need to be able to, again, understand that detail to be able to work with them. Don't just try to force people into a box, right? Partner with the business. Don't just try to force people into a box. Just because you have a tool and you implemented the tool doesn't necessarily mean that you get to cram it down their throat. It helps when you have that. When you have the senior executives buy in and build into that process, that conversation helps. But again, if you go and implement something or you go and develop something and you're not partnering with the business all the way through the process, you're going to fail. You will fail. Some of you are going right now and thinking to yourself, you know what, I just got done with my BRD and, I focused on my area, but maybe I didn't talk to some of those other areas that kind of do the same thing. You might want to do that because otherwise, this is now your tool. This isn't the company's tool. It's not the company's solution. It's your solution. People here watch Game of Thrones, right? The immediate item that people go to immediately whenever we have this conversation is it's kingdom building, right? If you're not partnering, you risk kingdom building. Next one up here is out-of-the-box functionality. Use it. Use it. Another item that we have, when I'm talking to a bunch of companies and they're trying to figure out how we've been able to be successful, how we've been able to upgrade because we've upgraded our platform twice, and I'm going through a third one right now. Successfully upgraded our platform twice. That's a big deal. Why? Because I do that. The vendor's done this, right? The tool's done this. They've been implemented all over the place. So focus on that out-of-the-box functionality. We have 3 customizations at Blue Cross. 3. About to be a 4th, but it's not in prod yet, so I can still say 3. We've got 3. One is for model audit rule. One is within PDMS. And the third one is for restricted issues and attorney-client privilege. If you're trying to do restricted issues or attorney-client privilege and you have issue management, and the vendor tries to tell you, hey, we've never done that before, we do it. It's there. So know that that item is there and know that it's available. And that's why having these conversations and things like this really help, because you can hear what other companies are doing, start to leverage some of that functionality in detail, and be able to grow that piece. If you stay out of the box as much as you can, it makes upgrading go a lot easier. It's also really easy at that point to go to different business areas and get everybody on. If you over-configure your forms or try to customize workflow, it now makes it really hard for the other areas to use the tool. Stay generic wherever you can. But at the same time, don't be afraid to add a field here or there. But go back to that governance structure and make sure that all the executives are aligned on those additions that you're doing. And if they're not aligned, or if somebody's got a problem with it, do what we do. We do change forms and bring people to our executives and have them sell it. If I think that it could impact one of my major areas, I'm talking to them constantly, because the last thing that you want to do is implement something and then go to like your largest user base or something that's like very critical, like model audit rule testing, high trust test, things of that nature, right? If you impact those areas and you impact their ability to do their reporting, their detail, their control monitoring, their issue management, you're going to lose them immediately. And then you've lost that partnership, you've lost that trust. That's one thing you can never do here when you're running a program, is lose that trust. Focus on readiness and maturity. If an area doesn't have their process documented, if they can't tell you exactly what they need, if they don't know their reports, if they don't know who their stakeholders are, they're not ready. If you put them on the tool, you're going to run into a situation where you're constantly changing and holding their hands. They have to know their own process, and it has to be a mature enough item to move forward and into the solution, into the tool. Otherwise, you're setting yourself up for failure, and your team runs around and goes all over the place. That's twice, Marlene. Be your own champion. You heard me mention earlier about screaming from the rooftops, right? The good, the bad, the indifferent. Be willing to do that. Own your failures. Own your successes. If you aren't at the forefront saying what you're able to do, the tool's going to die. The program's going to die. And if you're not owning failures and mistakes, or you're letting your ego get in the way, the program's going to die. The tool's going to die. It's going to happen. You're going to fail. That's the reality. As you're doing this, you got to understand it's their process, it's their data, it's their detail. You're trying to enable them. You want to enable them. You got to have them at the table, which leads us to that customer focus. They're your customer. You got to keep them comfortable. And as you roll out new functionality, you got to be talking to them. Or if there's new options or opportunities, or if you're talking to ERM and then you hear over here they're looking at new risk management reports in detail, align those people. Bring them together. Help the right hand talk to the left. Communicate often, or as we like to say, over-communicate. Make sure you're constantly communicating with those individuals, those senior executives and executives. They should know everything that you're doing, especially if you're in their space. And maintain that sense of urgency. If you're not, they won't be. If you run into a business area that could be a little bit sluggish, maybe they're not entirely on the board with using the tool, using your process. Maybe they don't believe in the secret sauce. Here's how you help them believe. Know your process and your tipping points. If you don't know those, they're not going to believe in you. And above all else, live your mantra. Every program needs a mantra, right? You do. You need one. What's your battle cry? Ours this year is ready, willing, and able, and we'll talk about it. Allow your program to evolve with your mantra. Your battle cry when you first start isn't going to be your battle cry 3 years from now, right? For us, when we started, it was all aboard. Even though we were focusing on compliance, we were working with all these business areas to define their business cases, to define our roadmap, to make sure we were meeting with their executives so that they understood when in the order they were coming. And sometimes you run into, like, we'll call it the golden goose, where you're able to get people at the same time because it's the same process, those coordinated functions. Focus on those areas and make sure you're streamlining them towards the top. But it wasn't just from an all-aboard perspective. For 2015, man, I blew it. 2015 was all about readiness for us. Readiness, if you're not ready, if your process isn't documented, if you're not mature, I'm not talking to you yet. I'll help you with some of your documentation. I'll give you some tools, enablers, some kits to get you there. And I'll meet with you and make sure you know what we're doing from a program perspective and within the applications. But focus on that readiness piece. And then 2016 was all transparency, alignment, and reporting. Letting people know where to go and how to view the reports. Making sure the company and our users knew what they could see, what they couldn't see, why they could and why they can't. And allowing that transparency to occur. Last year, we were focused on do different and do better. What does that mean? Just because you've done things the same way for however long within that process doesn't mean you have to do it going forward. You should be challenging yourself. You should be challenging your other program leaders. You should be challenging your peer group, your partners, to do things differently. That's the only way you're going to grow and streamline from an enterprise perspective. That's it. If you can challenge them and you can have and go through those processes and get them willing and open and receptive to new ideas, this moves. If you can't do that, if you can't be your own champion, if you can't have those conversations, if you can't toot the horn of your team when you're a success and toot the horn of the team when you fail and own it, that's going to be difficult. And this year, we're all about ready, willing, and able. For us as a program and for us as an enterprise, ties that all together. You have to be ready. Your readiness has to be in place. Your documents, your tools, your process has to be mature. You have to have the right people, the right butts in the right seats and be good to go. And see the value. You have to be willing. You have to be willing to embrace that value. You have to be willing to embrace that change. You have to be willing to do different and do better. If you're ready and you're not willing, you're not going to want to come. You're not going to want to come onto my solution. You're not going to want to come onto the solution. You're not going to want to work with our team to do this. If you're not willing, it's not going to work. You're going to hit resistance all along the way. Maybe it's with the executive in that space. Maybe it's with your peer. Maybe it's with the individual contributors. You've got to figure out those buttons at each level and figure out how and when to push them. Because they have to be willing. And if you're ready, you got all your ducks in a row, all your documentation, all levels are willing to go, everybody sees the value, you got to be able. If they're not able, you're going to fail. And what do I mean by able? Give me time. Sometimes it's give me time, your resource time, your detail, your people. Have the right butts in the seats. Sometimes it's give me money. But again, if some senior executive's button is, I'm not paying, I just want to use it, then you got to work around with other executives to get there. But the second you walk in and say, ooh, we need a little bit of money to make this happen for this configuration or whatever. You could lose them. And although they might be ready and willing, they're just not able. And sometimes you're ready, willing, you realize that, you know what, there are other competing priorities in that area, and that's okay too. Move them someplace else on the roadmap. But come to an agreement right then and there. When are they coming on? When are you coming into their space to do this and help them out? Why is that important? It's important because you need to streamline your resources, your people, bring the vendor in when you need to, and in our case, we don't let them leave, so they're always there. Lock them in a room with no windows. It's fun. But it really, that's the big piece, right? So for us, we're really focused on all of these things, but it all comes together with the ready, willing, and able. That's everything to us. If you miss one of those buckets, I can't help you. I want to help you, and I'll help you get that, whatever that piece and that bucket and that detail is. If you've got 2 out of the 3, that's great. If you've got none of them, that's fine too. Come talk to me when you're ready. Come talk to me when you're willing. Come talk to me when you're able to. Learn from the past or you're doomed to repeat it. We've highlighted 4 major areas here: people, process, technology, and vendor. If you don't understand those 4 buckets from an impact from each one of your implementations on what was successful, what failed, why it failed, you're going to fail again. If you let your ego get in the way, you're going to fail. If you're not aligning with those senior executives in those areas, you're going to fail. If you're not able to break away from the "this is how we've always done things" mentality, you're going to fail. Every time you implement a new area, and as you're even rolling out in an area, do health checks with that particular executive, the team itself, the process. Make sure they know where you're at, and make sure you're able to talk to them about what's going well and what's not. And if something isn't going well, make sure you have a process and you define an action plan to correct it. And you document it. And then before you kick off into your next space, you go back through and you look at all those things. Don't just focus on the "this is what really worked," because again, that whole do different, do better that we talked about, right? You have to be willing to adapt as well. Your program, your tool, your processes. So take a look at what worked in the past, but really focus on those hiccups at those various points of the process. Before you go and do business requirements, look where are you at all your failures in the past or hiccups. Maybe it wasn't a failure. Maybe you just hit a roadblock here with this particular person in the company, right? And so as you're moving into that area, you want to understand what that roadblock could be before it happens again. We talked a little bit from a process perspective. Be willing. Change the way that you do things. Because if you're not willing to change the way that you do things, how are they going to be willing to change the way? You have to be able to adapt yourself. You have to help them adapt. And again, if they're not willing, and they're not willing to see the light, especially as you start talking about things like workflow and reporting and the value add, right? If they're not able to see that piece, you're not going to get them there. That's okay. That's okay. Move down the list. And understand from a technology perspective, this isn't going to replace. There's no magic button. Just because you have the tool and just because you have the process and just because you have the information doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to push a button and now all hands off. We can walk away. You can in some aspects from a reporting. You can automate reporting. So now instead of having that individual business area spend hours, days, weeks, months pulling together a report, you can automate that if you know that on the front end. Now the resource time allocation can be spent somewhere else. That enables you, right? And vendor. Don't do things yourself. Partner. Partner with your vendors. It could be your third-party integrator. highly recommend you using one. It could be the application vendor. Make sure they're there. They're frequently and they're aligned. I've mentioned a couple times, don't let them leave, and I mean that. Never let them leave. Budget for it and keep them there. Keep them there in the long run. You want this to be a strategic implementation for yourself. It's a journey. And you want to be able to hear what's being rolled out at other companies, what's successful for other companies. Keep them there. By keeping them there, you're hearing things quickly. Added to that, should you have a hiccup, you know where to go. Walk over to that cube. And then you're not just picking up the phone all the time, texting, emailing, fire drill, right? You have somebody exactly there that you can use. That's your trusted advisor. And if they don't have the answer, they know where to go to get the answer. We don't let the vendor, we don't let MEtricStream leave, and we don't let Ernst & Young, our integrator, leave. They're there all the time. It's intentional. We budget for it. We're constantly rolling out new processes. And I want them there. I need them there. Great support portal. So, talked about this a little bit. Know your business partners, understand their goals, realize the transparency that comes from that. Make sure everybody is as integrated as possible, and not only to what they're trying to do, but what other areas are trying to do. We had an aha moment this year with High Trust, with our configuration, where we looked at the individuals reporting for model audit rule and other controls that were also going to be control owners for High Trust, already in the tool. So instead of us just defining requirements and working with information security to define those requirements, we pulled in those control owners. We started querying those control owners because we had some ideas on how we wanted to implement for the pillars of High Trust, right, within the system. But I wanted their buy-in too. I wanted them to say, yep, that makes sense, because they're in there for already MAR and other areas and other controls that are being tested from a monitoring and review perspective. You want to make sure you're touching into that user base. Just because you have the process owner, we had information security, we had us, we had all this detail there. Make sure you're talking to your end users. All of them. Not just the ones that like what you're doing. We survey our end users every single year, twice a year, at all levels. We talked about the people that are in the tool monthly, quarterly, annually. We're surveying them all. And I want to know what they like, what they don't like, what do they want to see enhanced. And above all else, in order to maintain success and adoption, know your support model. Don't just roll out into an area, implement, and walk away. You have to be there with them. They're your partners. You want to understand their goals and when they change and how they change. And you want to give them every tool and enabler possible to make sure that they continue to leverage the system in the most efficient way possible. We do PowerPoints, quick reference guides, training videos, weekly office hours, quarterly blasts out to the user base when we change something. Because although we could have had a conversation with you and your team and made you understand that, and that change and that detail, we understand that you're not always going to have total communication and alignment. So we want to make sure everybody knows when we're changing things or we're implementing something and why we're making changes and what's changing, how it's going to impact them. So we blast them. And we have office hours every week. We sit in a room, open conference line, a few hours. Sometimes you get a bunch of people come in, other times you don't. That's okay too, but at least you know it's a resource for them. Hey, I forgot how to log in. Where's the link? Or I'm getting stuck in this update for this issue, for this control, for this risk, or I seem to keep getting this error message. I'm doing something wrong, but I just can't figure it out. So you help them out. You need to be willing to adapt. You need to be able and willing to work with those areas and know what their priorities are and understand that those priorities are going to be constantly shifting and changing. And as theirs shift, yours should be shifting. Yours should be changing. In order for you to do different, do better, in order for you to be able to get to a ready, willing, and able state, you need to be willing to adapt. And if you're not adapting, you're going to fail. I want everybody in this room to be successful. I want you to be able to learn from things that we've had from our rollouts that have worked really well, things that haven't worked really well. Above all else, when we leave here, we should be talking. That's the big gain. We should be talking. And as you're rolling out new things and new items, if you hit a snag, if you hit something that popped, reach out. Reach out into the community, reach out to us, reach out to whoever, and have that conversation. Be willing to have that conversation. We all want to be successful. But in order to do that, we've got to be willing to adapt too. Thank you.